Imagine standing on the edge of the world, 29,000 feet above it, where every breath is borrowed, every step a gamble with death. Now ask yourself this: what would you do if saving yourself meant leaving someone else to die? On Everest, the answer isn't always heroic, it's painfully human. And sometimes, it's selfish. Brutally selfish. On May 22, 1996, the mountain claimed multiple lives during one of the deadliest storms in history. Climbers like Doug Hansen, Yasuko Namba, and Rob Hall faced a terrifying choice: push on to the summit or descend to safety. Each decision, each hesitation, each fleeting hope carried weight heavier than oxygen tanks could bear. And the worst part? The people around them weren't just strangers. They were friends, guides, fellow dreamers, tethered to life by ropes and fragile trust. Everest doesn't care about intentions. It doesn't forgive mistakes. And the mountain whispers one haunting truth: sometimes the deadliest obstacle isn't the frostbite, the blizzard, or the thin air. It's the selfish choice in a split second. In this story, we're not talking about heroes on glossy magazine covers. We're talking about real climbers, real choices, and real regrets that echo across the Khumbu icefall and up to the summit where only ghosts tread. You'll hear the moments when climbers realized too late that their decisions mattered, when hope and fear collided, and when the thin line between survival and catastrophe vanished beneath their crampons. So, if you think you know what it takes to climb Everest, or if you've ever wondered why so many stories end in tragedy, stay with us. By the end of this tale, you'll understand why some deaths on Everest aren't accidents, they're warnings. And before we go any further, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Join Ben's stories and experience every heartbeat, every gasp, every regret, as if you were right there on the mountain yourself. The morning started deceptively calm. The sun had just risen over the jagged peaks of the Himalayas, painting the snow in gold and pink. For climbers like Doug Hansen, Rob Hall, and Yasuko Namba, it should have felt like triumph. But Everest has a way of disguising danger behind beauty. Every crunch of boot on ice, every whistle of wind, was a reminder that the mountain was listening, waiting. By 7 a.m., the summit seemed tantalizingly close. Rob Hall, experienced guide and dreamer, led his team with precision, checking oxygen levels, ropes, and mental states. Doug Hansen, who had tried and failed the previous year, was exhausted but determined. Yasuko Namba, vibrant and smiling only hours ago, hid the tremor of fear beneath layers of thermal gear. And then the first cracks appeared, not in the ice, but in their confidence. A sudden gust threw a spray of powder into the air, reducing visibility to a few feet. Climbers ahead vanished like ghosts. The familiar landmarks were gone. Anxiety tightened its grip like a vice. Hansen's breathing became shallow. Every inhale felt like dragging fire through his lungs. Namba's eyes darted skyward, scanning the summit that now seemed impossibly distant. And Hall, calm yet tense, felt the subtle tremor in the rope, a signal that someone was faltering behind him. The storm hit with a vicious, almost personal fury. Blinding snow and icy winds howled like an ancient predator. Climbers froze mid-step, caught between the irresistible pull of the summit and the terrifying promise of death below. It was here, in this chaotic dance of hope and fear, that decisions became life or death. Hall signaled for the team to slow. Hansen wanted to push, craving the summit like a lifeline, but every step forward sapped his strength further. Namba hesitated, her summit dream fighting against the primal instinct to survive. This is where Everest shows its true nature. The mountain doesn't just test skill, it tests morality. In a single glance, climbers could see the faces of their companions, exhausted, fearful, dependent. One wrong decision, 1 second of selfish thinking, and the rope that bound them could become a shackle to disaster. Hansen lagged behind. Hall urged him to move faster, but the frostbite in his fingers and the fatigue in his legs slowed him to a crawl. Namba, catching glimpses of Hansen struggling, felt a pang of guilt, of helplessness. Every heartbeat was a drum of impending catastrophe, and then came the first true panic. Hall noticed that Hansen's oxygen was dangerously low, Yet he refused to descend. The summit was so close, the dream so real. But at what cost? As the storm intensified, climbers found themselves in a terrifying limbo. The mountain offered moments of relief, brief lulls in wind, a sudden sighting of the next marker, a reassuring shout from a teammate. But these were fleeting. Fear returned, stronger each time. The line between life and death blurred with every breath, every step, every hesitation. And then, just as hope seemed tangible, disaster struck. A misstep on the icy slope sent Hansen sliding, the rope tightening, pulling Hall and others into a frantic struggle. Namba watched in horror, her heart pounding in sync with the snowstorm's ferocity. It was in that instant that the first seeds of regret were sown, not for the mountain, not for the climb, but for the choices that had led them here. Choices made in the name of ambition, dreams, and pride. No one would admit it yet, but the mountain had begun its silent judgment. Every action, every selfish impulse, every fleeting hesitation would echo through the remainder of their climb. For some, that echo would be fatal. The summit was closer than anyone dared whisper, yet the mountain seemed to stretch endlessly before them. Every step forward felt heavier, every breath shallower. Rob Hall knew that in moments like these, climbers reveal who they truly are, not in courage, but in choices. Doug Hansen's eyes, glassy and distant, betrayed a mix of obsession and exhaustion. Yasuko Namba tried to keep pace, but her legs quivered with fatigue. The storm showed no mercy, its icy fingers clawing at every exposed inch of skin, at every flicker of hope. Then came the first, true heartbreak. Hall noticed Hansen's hands beginning to swell, a silent indicator that frostbite was taking hold faster than oxygen could compensate. He tried reasoning with him. "Doug, we need to descend now." But the words fell into a wind-swept void. Hansen shook his head, his mind fixated on the summit. One more step, just one more. The summit would erase failure, erase doubt. It would redeem him in a way life on the ground never could. Namba's eyes darted between the two men. In that instant, she felt a pang of helpless guilt. She understood the allure of the summit, the intoxicating pull of a dream decades in the making, but she also saw the cost. Every snowdrift, every jagged rock, every gasp of air could be the last. She wanted to scream, to pull Hansen back, but her own body betrayed her. Each step was agony, each breath a test of survival. And yet in the chaos, she clung to hope. Hope that somehow, they would all live. Hall felt it too, the creeping realization that decisions mattered more than skill, more than preparation, more than oxygen tanks. Every choice could tip the balance between survival and tragedy. As he glanced over his shoulder, he saw climbers from other expeditions struggling, some teetering dangerously close to the edge of collapse. The mountain wasn't just testing them individually, it was testing every connection, every bond, every decision made in selfish pursuit or noble intent. The summit finally came into view, glowing like a cruel mirage through the blizzard. Hansen lunged forward, driven by obsession while Hall fought to rein him in. In that brief, heart-stopping moment, Hall realized the magnitude of what was happening. Not just the physical peril, but the moral peril. If Hansen fell, if Namba faltered, if any of them made the wrong choice, the consequences wouldn't be contained to a single climber. It would ripple through every rope, every decision, every life tethered to theirs. And then it happened. Hansen slipped. One foot, misjudged, slid across the ice. Hall lunged, anchoring himself, yanking with every ounce of strength. Namba froze, the sound of the rope stretching like a scream in the wind. For a heartbeat, relief surged. They were still together. But that relief was fleeting. The storm intensified, visibility vanished, and time seemed to stretch into infinity. Every heartbeat became a countdown, every breath a gamble. In the hours that followed, climbers faced a paradoxical loop, moments of hope followed by plunges into terror. 1 minute, they could see the next marker. The next, it disappeared in whiteout, leaving them to navigate a landscape as alien as the moon. Namba's mind raced, replaying every choice she had made, wondering if ambition had clouded judgment. Hall, the ever-calculating guide, felt the weight of responsibility crushing him, not for glory, not for pride, but for human lives now hanging by a thread. Hansen, oblivious to the impending disaster, still reached for the summit, consumed by the idea that reaching the top would justify everything. By late afternoon, oxygen tanks dwindled, bodies trembled, and the storm refused to relent. Hall radioed base camp, a desperate attempt to coordinate rescues that might never come. Every message was a reminder that time was slipping through their fingers like powdered snow. Namba, on the brink of collapse, felt a profound clarity. This was not a battle of strength or skill. This was a battle of conscience, of regret, of humanity itself, and the mountain, indifferent and eternal, was watching every falter, every hesitation, every selfish impulse. As night fell, climbers huddled for brief moments of shelter, sharing sparse warmth and fleeting words. It was during these moments, in the flickering shadows, that Hall, Hansen, and Namba confronted the rawest truths of their climb. Hall's thoughts were haunted by a question he had always asked others, but now faced himself. Would you sacrifice yourself to save another? Hansen, staring at the swirling snow, felt the first pangs of regret, but they were fleeting, drowned by obsession and exhaustion. Namba, trembling, realized that survival wasn't just about reaching the summit. It was about preserving the humanity that the mountain so ruthlessly stripped away. And yet, the mountain had one final, cruel twist. As dawn approached, climbers prepared for descent. But descent on Everest is not simply retracing steps. It is a gamble, where every miscalculation can be fatal. The storm had reshaped the path, hidden crevasses, and blurred landmarks. Each step forward required trust, not just in equipment or guides, but in each other. One wrong decision, one selfish moment, and the mountain would claim another life. By the time the first pale light of morning touched the icy peaks, the climbers were already walking a knife edge between salvation and catastrophe. Hope and fear intertwined in a dangerous dance, their internal monologues echoing across the Khumbu icefall. This is the moment when dreams clash with reality, when ambition confronts mortality, and when every climber realizes too late that Everest does not forgive selfishness. The morning light revealed a world transformed by the storm. Snow had drifted into new, treacherous shapes, hiding crevasses and ice shelves that had seemed familiar just hours before. Every step was uncertain. Every breath, a reminder that at 29,000 feet, the body itself becomes an enemy. Rob Hall led the descent with grim determination. He knew that the summit, though conquered, was meaningless if his team did not survive the way down. Yet his eyes constantly flicked backward to Doug Hansen, who was struggling more visibly with each step. Frostbite had begun to gnaw at Hansen's fingers and toes, his movements growing erratic. Hall's mind raced, calculating risks, replaying every decision made in the storm's chaos. If he had turned Hansen back earlier, if he had forced a retreat sooner, would they be here now, teetering on the edge of life and death? Namba, behind them, was on the verge of collapse. Her oxygen was dangerously low, her muscles shaking uncontrollably. She could barely lift her feet, yet the summit obsession still tugged at her mind, whispering that giving up would mean failure. And then came the moment of clarity. A surge of fear so intense it burned through exhaustion. She understood that survival demanded humility over ambition. She realized, in a heartbeat, that the mountain had been teaching them a lesson they could not afford to ignore. Pride kills. The storm's fury continued, relentless, a living, breathing entity intent on separating the survivors from the fallen. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Climbers clung to ropes and each other, trusting that the bonds between them could withstand not just the wind, but the mistakes of human error. Hall reached Hansen and tried again to push him downward. "Doug, we have to move!" he shouted through the wind, but the words barely pierced the roar. Hansen's obsession with the summit had hardened into a dangerous blind spot. One misstep, one slip could bring them both down. And then, it happened. Hansen faltered on an icy ledge. Hall lunged, grabbing the rope, anchoring himself with every ounce of strength. The two men hung precariously above a yawning crevasse. The mountain seemed to pause, almost holding its breath, as if waiting to see which choice would define their fate. In that suspended moment, Hansen's eyes met Hall's. Panic, fear, and finally a flicker of regret. He understood too late that ambition had nearly killed him, and worse, had endangered everyone else. Namba was frozen nearby, witnessing the struggle. Her own regret was visceral. She had pushed herself forward, ignored the warnings of her body, and now watched as human lives dangled in the balance. She thought of her family, her dreams, and the irony that reaching the summit had brought them all to this brink of disaster. Tears froze on her cheeks, and in that moment, the mountain became more than a physical challenge. It became a mirror reflecting their deepest fears, their selfish impulses, and their fragile humanity. The descent continued, slower now, each step a careful negotiation between hope and terror. Hall helped Hansen inch down from the ledge, sweat and frost mingling on their faces, muscles screaming in protest. Namba followed, her progress painstakingly slow. The storm raged, but fleeting moments of clarity allowed them to see markers, navigate jagged rocks, and avoid hidden crevasses. These brief respites were salvation, but salvation was fragile. The mountain demanded constant vigilance, constant sacrifice, constant awareness that one wrong move would be the end. Hours stretched into a nightmarish eternity. Each climber was isolated within their own mind, trapped in a cycle of fear, hope, and reflection. Hall wrestled with responsibility, questioning whether guiding others had been noble or merely hubris. Hansen battled obsession, regret, and the creeping realization that the summit was meaningless without life to return to. Namba confronted mortality and pride, understanding the raw truth. The mountain does not care for dreams, only choices matter. By midday, some distance from the summit, the storm began to abate slightly. Visibility improved, but the aftermath of exhaustion, frostbite, and hypoxia left the climbers vulnerable. Yet in this fragile light, the mountain offered an ironic mercy, the chance to reflect on human folly, to confront the selfish impulses that had threatened their lives, and perhaps to survive, not just physically, but morally. For Hall, Hansen, and Namba, the descent became more than survival. It became penance, a reckoning with ambition, fear, and regret. They each understood that the mountain had not only tested their physical limits, but had stripped them bare, exposing choices that were selfish, reckless, or courageous. And the deeper lesson lingered. Every climber who sets foot on Everest carries the weight of this knowledge. Every choice, every hesitation, every act of selfishness or bravery becomes part of the mountain's unyielding story. As they approached the lower camps, the storm's roar faded into memory, leaving behind silence, snow, and reflection. They had survived barely, but the echoes of regret would remain long after the climb ended. And though the summit could be measured in feet, the true ascent, the confrontation with human nature, was far higher, far more treacherous, and far more unforgettable. The descent had become a grim ritual. Each step carried echoes of the summit's obsession and the storm's merciless judgment. Rob Hall, once a confident guide, now moved with a calculated caution, every nerve alert, every muscle screaming against exhaustion. He could feel Hansen's body faltering behind him, the subtle tremor of frostbite in his fingers, the shallow rasp of his breathing, a constant reminder that their choices had consequences beyond ambition. Yasuko Namba struggled as well. Her body was near collapse, yet her mind replayed every decision she had made on the mountain. She recalled the moments when pride had whispered in her ear, urging her to push higher despite exhaustion. She remembered Hansen's stubborn refusal to descend, Hall's desperate attempts to save him, and the storm that had made every action critical. The clarity that came with sheer survival was harsh. The mountain had revealed not just the limits of her body, but the limits of human judgment under pressure. At the lower camps, other climbers had already begun to grapple with loss. The storm had claimed lives across the slopes. Strangers, teammates, and even seasoned guides. Bodies lay frozen in the snow, silent witnesses to the deadly choices made above. Hall and his remaining team could see them in fleeting glimpses. A rope stretched toward nothingness, a glove frozen mid-air, a shadowy figure half buried in drifted snow. Every sight struck like a hammer, forcing reflection and self-reproach. Hansen's moment of clarity had come too late. As he stumbled near a crevasse, He realized the true cost of his obsession. It wasn't the frostbite, the wind, or even the altitude that had endangered him. It was his unwillingness to accept limits. For the first time, regret pierced through his desperation. He understood that the summit was hollow without life to enjoy it, without the ability to make amends for the choices that endangered others. And yet, the mountain allowed no redemption easy. Every step toward safety was a fight against exhaustion, hypoxia, and the memory of misjudgment. Namba, too, felt the weight of reflection. In the quiet moments between breaths, she thought of family, of friends, and of a life interrupted by ambition. The mountain had offered her a terrifying lesson. Success measured in fame or achievement meant nothing if survival required leaving humanity behind. Each choice she had made, pushing forward despite warning signs, relying on others' decisions, had brought them to the brink. And now, as the snowfields gave way to lower camps, the full gravity of survival and loss pressed upon her like a physical weight. The survivors reached Camp 4, where warmth and oxygen were finally available. Relief washed over them, but it was tempered by memory. The storm had left more than scars on their bodies. It had etched a permanent awareness of human frailty, selfishness, and the fragile web of trust upon which life depends. Hall looked at Hansen and Namba, and in their faces, he saw mirrored reflections of his own fears and regrets. The summit had been conquered, yes, but at what cost? Even those who survived faced a haunting truth. Some lives could not be reclaimed, some mistakes could not be undone. Stories of climbers left behind, bodies frozen in place, and choices that saved some while condemning others would linger forever. The mountain had a cruel sense of morality. It did not reward ambition. It only magnified the consequences of human error and selfishness. As the climbers began to descend further toward base camp, a chilling realization settled over them. Survival alone was not enough. Each would carry the mental toll of choices made, the haunting knowledge that every split-second decision had mattered, and that selfishness, even a momentary lapse, could claim lives. For Hall, Hansen, and Namba, the climb had become an indelible lesson in humility, morality, and the raw cost of ambition. In quiet moments by the fire at base camp, Hall's journal entries revealed the depth of reflection that no one else could see. He wrote of moments when he had hesitated, when he had pushed too hard, when he had witnessed the fine line between heroism and hubris. Hansen, once consumed by the summit, began to understand that ambition without regard for others was a path to destruction. Namba's thoughts lingered on the lives lost, the echoes of the mountain's unforgiving judgment, and the sharp, piercing truth. The summit is never worth another human life. Even long after the snow had melted, after the storm had passed and the survivors had returned home, the mountain's lesson remained. It was not just about the thrill of standing above the clouds or the glory of conquest. It was about responsibility, choices, and the harsh illumination of human frailty. Each heartbeat on Everest had been a warning. Selfishness, ambition, and pride can be more deadly than the mountain itself. And so, the story of that fateful climb lingered, etched in memory, recorded in journals, and retold to anyone willing to listen. It was a story not of triumph alone, but of human limits, moral reckoning, and the enduring echo of regret. For those who survived, every mountain thereafter became not just a physical challenge, but a moral one. And for those who fell, the memory remained a silent testament to the cost of choices, the cruelty of ambition, and the immutable truth that Everest does not forgive selfishness. By the time the survivors reached base camp, the mountain was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving a landscape of sparkling ice and snow, but also silence. Silence that screamed with the weight of lives lost, decisions made too late, and moments of selfishness that no one could undo. Hall, Hansen, and Namba looked around, seeing the frozen remnants of dreams and the stark reality of mortality. In that quiet, each felt the same thing, a gut-wrenching awareness that Everest had not been conquered in the way they had imagined. The summit, the glory, the pictures, none of it mattered compared to the lives that hung by a rope, the choices that could have changed everything, and the haunting truth that ambition unchecked is a silent killer. Hansen, for the first time, understood fully the selfishness that had almost destroyed him and others. Namba, exhausted and trembling, realized that the mountain had stripped away illusions, leaving only raw truth. Survival is measured not in feet climbed, but in the choices that honor life itself. And Hall? He carried the heaviest burden. Not the physical exhaustion, not the frostbite, not the trauma of guiding others. He carried the moral weight of being a witness to selfishness, of being the person who had to make the split-second calls that decided who lived and who didn't. His mind replayed every moment of hesitation, every step where ambition clashed with morality, every time the mountain had whispered its brutal lesson. Selfishness kills. Everest does not forgive. Everest does not negotiate. And sometimes, the deadliest obstacle is not a blizzard, not a crevasse, not thin air. It is the human ego, the fleeting desire to push oneself at the expense of others. That is the truth many never tell. That is the truth most who climb too high never see until it is too late. As the sun set over the Himalayas, Hall, Hansen, and Namba sat together, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot tea. Each heartbeat carried memory, regret, and a deep gratitude for survival. And then, as if the mountain itself was lending its voice to the lesson, they understood the final truth. The summit is meaningless without humility, without respect, without conscience. The mountain is eternal, but so too is the echo of choices made in fear, pride, or selfishness. So, before you chase your next dream, your next summit, or your next impossible goal, ask yourself, is it worth it? Are you willing to risk more than you can carry? Are you listening to the whispers of ambition, or to the voice of reason that reminds you life is fragile and human connection is precious? If this story moved you, if it made your heart race and your mind reflect, subscribe to Ben Stories. Join us for more journeys where courage, regret, and the human spirit collide on the edge of the world. Because every story we tell is not just about mountains, but about the choices that define us, the lives we touch, and the truths we often ignore, until it's too late.